others will join, I'm sure. Celine, would you like to start by opening the webinar?
Sure, thank you very much, Miriam, and good morning, good afternoon to all. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, and it's also a pleasure to actually welcome you all to this webinar. It's really reassuring and heartwarming to see so many of you following our webinars one after the others. I'd like also to thank very warmly the panelists that are joining for today's discussion. Bettina Dorendorf of KfW, Mary Taylor of NatWest, Gianluca Moncaoff of the European Banking Federation, and Natalie Shemwell of the SME Climate Hub. Really a pleasure. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation and for contributing to these discussions of today. And today is actually a very special webinar in the series of webinars that we are hosting through the platform, because it's taking place almost a month, day for day, before the OECD ministerial meeting on SME and entrepreneurship that we are organizing for the 27th and the 28th of June this year. And you know, at the OECD, this type of ministerial meetings, they don't take place that often. They take place every 5 years. So it's a very good opportunity for to bring ministers together under the OECD framework and to discuss key priorities and establish a forward-looking agenda on SME and entrepreneurship policies. So in just a month, there will be such an opportunity. And this year, the ministerial meeting will center on the theme of managing shocks and transitions, future-proofing SME and entrepreneurship policies. And that will be an opportunity to discuss how to rethink SME and entrepreneurship policies in support of recovery and resilience, of the twin transitions, and on reconfiguring global value chains. And as part of that, theme and broad framework that ministers will be discussing, there will be specific focuses on finance, on net zero policies, on skills, among other themes. But the finance theme and its interface with greening policies, sustainable development, will be a strong area of focus and priority for discussion at the ministerial. And core to that discussion will be how to enable SMEs to become key players in the green transition. We all know that collectively SMEs have a very significant environmental impact. They are also a source of innovation and a driver of that green transition. However, they are very often under-considered in policies and left aside because they are considered individually as being maybe too small to matter. So in this context, the ministerial meeting will put a very strong focus on how to enable these SMEs, the entrepreneurs, to play their role in the great transitions that are in front of us. And so the issues of SME greening and how to finance their journey to net zero will be really front and center of the discussions in June. And so what is the role of the platform in the run-up to that ministerial meeting? Well, you are all very important stakeholders as part of this platform on financing SMEs for sustainability. And you have many insights to contribute that can really help shape the high-level discussions that are going to take place, the forward-looking agenda. And we wanted to offer the opportunity of today's webinar for a discussion that will center on these issues. And those discussions will in turn help us refine and send key messages up to the high level to inform the high level political discussions. And just to mention that following today's discussion and webinar, we will actually finalize a statement to ministers on behalf of the platform, incorporating the key messages and priorities of the platform. The platform will also be represented in a high-level event organized by business at OECD that is taking place the day before the ministerial. So there are several opportunities to actually convey strong messages and priorities to the ministers that will be gathering at the OECD later on in June. So what we expect from today's discussions is that they center around building a robust support and finance ecosystem for SMEs on their journey to net zero. We know that SMEs rely very strongly on their surroundings, on their ecosystem to access some of the critical resources, including finance, to actually invest in their own transformation. And we hope that we can hear from all of you, and in particular, the public and private financial institutions that are represented by the panelists, but also in the audience, and those supporting institutions that work hand in hand with SMEs almost every day on climate, because you know what's happening, on the ground. And on our side, we really want to understand how to better engage SMEs in their ecosystems, to strengthen the role that each actor can play, and also to understand what actions the governments and regulators can take to create the conditions for this ecosystem to thrive. Of course, we also want to hear from you on how the platform can continue adding value through dialogue, knowledge exchange, in view of the ministerial, but also beyond. The team has a very big agenda going forward, a roundtable in the fall, and further activities. So please do speak up. We really want to hear your voice. So I really look forward to the discussions today, and let me pass the floor to Miriam Corinne, who is Senior Counselor on SMEs at the OECD, but also, the guru behind the sustainability finance platform, so that she can introduce the panelists and lead you through the discussions. Thank you very much, and Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Celine, and thanks to everyone for being with us today. It's my turn now also to welcome our panelists. We're really very fortunate to have all of them with us today. Each panelist can bring a different and important perspective from representing different actors in the ecosystem, as Celine mentioned. So we're going to have interventions from each of the panelists in response to a couple of questions. Then we will have time for a discussion with all participants, a Q&A. You can feel free also to put in your comments and questions in the chat while the panelists are speaking. And I hope that we'll have enough time to get to all of your comments and ideas. So now I'd like to start by introducing our first panelist, Bettina Dorendorf, who is the Senior Sustainability and Sustainable Finance Manager with KfW, the German promotional bank that has been in existence for 75 years now. Bettina is active in the fields of financing sustainability, energy efficiency, and I also understand quite involved with work around the EU taxonomy and the circular economy. So welcome, Bettina. Bettina, I'd like to ask you how the German government and KfW are supporting SMEs' green transition. Can you tell us more about KfW's financing and advisory support to German SMEs in this area? And also maybe how you work with other actors in the sustainable finance ecosystem.
Okay, pleasure. I brought with me a couple of slides. Perhaps you could make sure we can all see them. And I will now give you a very short presentation. The next slide, please. Yes, a very short presentation to explain who we are, how we are organized, and what the main characteristics and products are to support SMEs in their transition towards net zero and sustainable investments. So KfW exists now for 75 years. It's a 100% public shareholder background, 80% shareholder background by the Federal Republic of Germany and 20% by the federal states. We benefit from a state guarantee. And the headquarters in Frankfurt. However, we have representative offices in worldwide. Quite an impressive balance sheet size of more than 550 billion euros, and financing volume last year of 166 billion euros, quite impressive, more than 8,000 employees. And due to the state guarantee, we benefit from a long-term AAA credit rating. So as you see on the slide, we provide promotional products for different stakeholder groups. We can divide our activities in 3 sections. First, the domestic promotional activities. Second, a commercial arm, the KfW IPEX Bank, offering export and project finance. And third, a large division operating under the mandate of the Federal Ministry for Development, offering support for emerging economies and developing countries. Now, I will focus on the domestic promotional activities. The domestic promotional activities make up roughly 2/3 of our business volume. So we see it's quite an important business section. And looking at the SME-related promotional offer, this is organized under the SME Bank and a business section dealing with SMEs and private clients. Okay, so let me highlight one of the most important features of our domestic promotional activities. We do not have branch offices. Instead, we operate with the so-called on-lending principle, meaning that we refinance a broad network of financing partners. So we work with a broad network of financing partners, and these financing partners on-lend the funds we provide to them to their end customers. This means we do not take individual customer credit risk. The credit risk is taken by the bank of the end customer, and this leads to a broad diversification of risk on the one hand, and on the other hand, we assure with this on-lending approach a very broad distributional availability of the products across the country. As you see on the right side, our business volume was 136 billion for the domestic activities in 2022. Okay, next slide, please. KfW is offering a broad spectrum of products for the corporate and SME sector, ranging from finance for startups and general corporate finance purposes to innovation finance, and also covering financial support for investments into energy and environmental protection. The main products are loans with a subsidized interest rate, mezzanine products, risk participation, and also grant elements, just to give you an overview. Next slide, please. Let me briefly highlight some findings of our climate barometer, which investigates the question to which extent the German corporate sector is investing into climate protection. So what we found out in the last edition is that SMEs have increased investments in climate protection. Around half of the climate protection investments of the German economy in 2021 were made by SMEs, summing up to 55 billion euros. Most of the climate investments by SMEs are in buildings, followed by climate-friendly mobility and measures to generate or store electricity or heat from renewable energies. This shows that climate protection is becoming more important for SMEs. The report confirms that larger companies are more likely to make climate protection investments, and the large companies which are responsible for the other half of climate protection investments are even the most frequent. but it's important to get everyone on board. And therefore, sustainable transformation is the focus of our funding activities. And now let's have a look at our current range of support products. Next slide, please. As you see, we offer a range of promotional support programs for SMEs, in particular loans with a low interest rate and in some cases partial debt relief. So in 2022, we supported SMEs with a volume of 18.5 billion euros to increase energy efficiency in buildings and in production facilities, and also in expanding renewable energy facilities. In addition to this, we have a so-called anchor offer for SMEs to finance startups and general purpose loans. Let's have a look at some of the main promotional products. The first one is looking at the building sector. So there we implement the federal promotion for energy efficiency in buildings on behalf of the federal government of economic affairs and climate change. So what's really important to know here that the basic principle is we provide the more efficient the building, the higher the incentive we provide to the promotional customer. In addition, since recently we also focus on the CO2 reduction along the life cycle of a building, what's important to know is that we blend loans and grants in a highly standardized approach. And for the SME sector, as well as for private clients, support of an energy expert is very important, and we require the involvement of an energy expert for each and every single promotional loan application. Renewable energies is another topical area we focus on. The KfW program for renewable energy standards is the largest loan program in Germany of this nature, highly standardized, well-established, and open to all investor groups, including SMEs. Another promotional approach is a loan for energy efficiency and climate neutrality in industry with low requirements as regards the size of the applicants, so open also for SMEs. This product looks at transformative and innovative technologies, and with this product we want to engage the corporate sector to look at ambitious target climate neutrality driven investments based on the technical screening criteria of the EU taxonomy. For those SMEs operating in the public sector, we offer loans and grants also to support the establishment of climate-friendly infrastructure in cities and municipalities. We support the development of integrated concepts and support for public enterprises with grants. And last but not least, we offer loan products for green mobility. So this was a very brief snapshot. The limited time frame is leads to a little summary of our promotional offer. I could tell you a lot more about this, but let me conclude by saying that we have decades of experience in dealing with the corporate sector. Supporting the German Mittelstand is one of the core activities of KfW's domestic promotional business. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bettina. That was really interesting to see the very diverse range of products and areas of focus you have in the environmental field. I was also very interested to hear the number you cited, that about half of the climate investments in Germany were undertaken by SMEs. So that's quite a large number, but probably, of course, not proportionate quite yet to the population of SMEs and the weight of SMEs in the German economy. And so that leads me to my follow-up question. What challenges do you face? What do you see as the biggest challenges in reaching some of those harder to reach SMEs? And linked to that, I would also ask, I noticed you mentioned funding in relation to the buildings. And of course, not all SMEs are owners of the property that they operate in. So how do you reach those harder to reach businesses? What are those challenges you face there?
Okay, so first let me mention that KfW is not offering advisory products. Okay, there is another institution in Germany, the Federal Office for Export Control, which is transposing advisory support on behalf of the federal government. But KfW is not offering advisory services in this regard. First and foremost, I would like to strengthen or like to highlight and create awareness of the structure of the corporate sector in Europe. We all have, when we talk about SMEs, we have to keep in mind that in Europe, there are 25 million of active enterprises, of which 99.8% are SMEs, according to my information, and 93% are micro enterprises with less than 10 employees, and just 1% are medium-sized enterprises. So having this in mind leads me to talk about the challenges to reach SMEs. And I would like to talk about the challenges from two angles. First one, from the perspective of KfW as a promotional bank. We know that in particular SMEs struggle with finding the right promotional offer. And therefore, in order to reach the highly fragmented corporate sector, we have to develop the multi-layer approach. And given that KfW, as I mentioned, does not have a direct customer relationship due to the on-lending approach we practice in our domestic promotional activities, what we do is we make sure we best design our marketing activities to reach SMEs. And for this purpose, we study very carefully the customer journey. The goal is to place the information on the promotional loan offer directly at the media and at the place where SMEs obtain information and seek for information. For this purpose, we developed so-called personas, so profiles of typical SME decision makers to identify where and with what kind of content we can best reach them. And so what we find out is that the banks, the financial institutions working with the SMEs, but also their auditors, their tax advisors, are very important in influential contacts for the SMEs, which we have to take in mind when we distribute and deploy the information on promotional product offer. For this purpose, we are in touch and in regular touch with all relevant actors in the corporate sphere, with associations, with our financing partners, making sure that there is a regular information and also training with regard to the promotional offer. So the challenge is the high degree of fragmentation. And there is another challenge. There is a lack of academic study, data, and information on the barriers SMEs face to invest into sustainable product, into sustainability, energy efficiency, and sustainable investments. So, however, I would like to take another angle as well. What are the challenges to reach SMEs? I think we have to take into account the specific challenges the SME sector is facing. For SMEs have to navigate a high degree of complexity. And we know that SMEs struggle with the complex challenge of managing their core business, and at the same time develop a business strategy which addresses sustainability and corresponding investments. That's why we have to be aware that there is a lack of time, a lack of information, a lack of trust in potential results, and a lack of access to finance in some cases, which has to be addressed. These are the biggest challenges: the high degree of complexity and the high degree of fragmentation of the corporate sector. And we have to make sure we well understand the particular non-financial barriers to investment and address them accordingly. I think at the end of the session, we will come to a couple of recommendations, and then I will outline a little bit more on this.
Thank you so much, Bettina. That's you pointed to a lot of very key barriers. Now I'd like to turn to our next panelist and introduce Mairead Taylor, who is the Director for NatWest Commercial Mid-Market for Dorset and South Wiltshire. Mairead is an active supporter and advocate of business. She leads a team of relationship managers and is very engaged in supporting local communities to help them through financial education, enterprise, and sustainability. NatWest is extremely active in the field of sustainability and pushing, supporting the transition to net zero. So we're very pleased to have Mairead with us today. Mairead, I'd like to ask you some questions about how the recent shocks across economies around the world have been impacting SME net zero investments in the client pool that you serve. What have you seen happening there recently? And could you tell us how NatWest is working to accompany SMEs on this journey?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Miriam, and thank you very much for having me. NatWest is the biggest banker of SMEs in the UK, so we have a huge, that's a huge privilege, but also a huge responsibility in order to make sure that we're able to support them. And without doubt, the recent economic shocks have definitely had an impact, but ironically, both negative and positive. So I'll sort of cover a bit on both, but helping support our businesses to be more resilient and adapt to climate change and transition has always been a really important, critical part of our role. And you know, the financial services industry as a whole have got a big responsibility here. Regardless of the recent shocks, I'd say even before that, and as you'd probably expect, businesses are in very different places on here for a number of reasons that Bettina was just alluding to. So, you know, it depends on their resources, their capacity, their knowledge, and what other issues that they're facing. So without doubt, the increasing interest rates, the energy crisis, the supply chain challenges that our customers have faced have all had an impact. And some of that has meant that businesses' action plans on climate have been superseded by other more immediately pressing issues, such as labour challenges, getting goods into sale, and spiralling energy costs that making their costs, you know, sort of not sustainable. But equally, I would say that often these priorities can be aligned. So reducing costs, controlling energy, for example, usage and how it's generated is not, you know, opposing to some of the recent issues that those businesses are facing. We've seen businesses that have survived the pandemic and supply chain challenges and the ways of trading since impacted by Brexit. They have become more resilient to change, and we've seen changes to their business models, to their investment in technology and the ways of working with employees. And we continue to see businesses making strategic investment in reducing their carbon footprint, making more medium and long-term investment decisions to build a more sustainable business. And there are also a number of sort of motivators, drivers here that do definitely come into play. So, I mean, and this is not an exclusive list by any means, but purpose-led, opportunity-led, cost-led, compliance-led, certainly some key ones that we've seen examples of. So to put a bit more substance on that, we've seen a lot of businesses making the decision that they want to invest in solar panels, for example, but that's been a big investment decision. Their lack of knowledge, lack of confidence to make the change, lack of capability and where to go, often being cited as the reason for them delaying. But with better data, better intel, support and knowledge, the advantages for those businesses, both from an economic and purpose-led perspective, are clear. And we've seen customers then being able to, with some of the tools that we've been able to provide, be able to make those decisions with confidence and improved capability. And in this case, enable to, control their future energy costs. We've seen similar with LED lighting and electric vehicles and battery storage. We've also seen some decisions being made more on opportunity and compliance led. So we had a very recent example, and this will be one of many across the UK, of a company that was excluded from bidding for a contract that they, because they didn't have a credible transition plan in place. And further up that supply chain, it was an essential prerequisite. And customers don't want to be experiencing that again. So actually starting to make strategic investments becomes business critical. So what are NatWest doing to support our customers in our transition? Well, we're doing lots. We've still got lots and lots more to do. As I said, it's a big responsibility, and we've got to stay ahead and lead by example. So I'll highlight a couple of the strategic things that we're doing as a bank, which obviously, as we're doing it, we can help and share our knowledge with our clients. What we're seeing, but we've created a 100 billion fund, and it's purely targeted to invest in climate and sustainable funding and financing, with 10 billion of this fund allocated to invest in residential properties with an EPC rating of A and B, and we of that fund we've done 32.6 billion so far, so a lot more to do. We've got an ambition that 50% of our mortgage portfolio is EPC rating C or above by 2030. And again, we can't just make that as a statement. We've got to then help take our and encourage and provide tools and solutions to help our customers get there. We've got obviously a huge responsibility to help end the most harmful activities, phase out coal, oil and gas and other high emitting sectors. But we want to do this with working with our clients and supporting those with credible transition plans. And that's, but it's only where that's not possible that we then will, would have to exit the final decision. And we've clearly laid out our quite strong commitments here and continue to reduce our exposure. Creating, building and powerful partnerships and collaboration, absolutely key, and I see that across all industries and sectors. So we're collaborating cross-industry, creating products, solutions, services to support our clients, and I will highlight a few of these. Getting our own house in order, so our executives having targets and remuneration linked to our climate ambitions, absolutely, it's got to start from the top. Making progress to meet our target to reduce our own direct operations emissions by 50% by 25. Making sure that we're only using renewable electricity in all our global operations by 2025, and improving our energy productivity by 40%. We've detailed all of these in the climate disclosures, and I've shared some slides that can be shared afterwards. In the UK and Ireland, electricity consumption, we are using 100% renewable electricity now. Installing electric vehicle charging infrastructures in 15% of our spaces across our UK portfolio by 2030, upgrading our electric fleet. And in 2022, we built one of the biggest in the UK and Europe electric vehicle car park charging car parks for all our colleagues and visitors in Gogoburn. That's got 264 chargers, and hopefully there'll be a lot more of those to come. We've very proudly of this. We first bank to launch in the UK Carbon Planner, which is a free use digital platform supporting UK businesses in their decarbonisation journey. And this has been created to reduce their carbon footprint, allows clients to input data, calculate a carbon footprint, and then surface tailored actions and identify support. And it includes scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3, as much as we can on scope 3 at the moment. And when it comes to the actions, NatWest have given that transport and energy generate 80% of the UK emissions and are prevalent in the majority of all our businesses. NatWest have created additional support in these areas with some of the partnerships that I will probably come on to talk about in a bit. And I think probably, if I was going to finish off with, I would say one of the things that we've done, because it is a really complex area, and certainly for SMEs, without the time, the skills, the resource, and other focuses, trying to make it as easy and as transparent and as clear as possible. We have now adopted a systems thinking approach, which is covered in one of my slides on slide 4. The way we can help clients from a whole chain of supply, from the if we take food, for example, we've partnered with McCain's, and then we consider the whole end-to-end of that food system. So from the farmers through to the food retailers. So we're looking at how we can do that across all of those systems, and then create models and tools to help our clients. And the other thing I'll touch on now is our green loan asset finance and our green loan proposition, and that is to help give businesses access to cheaper finance supporting their climate transition. There are a number of other things, but I thought they were things I would cover.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mairead. That's those are really, really, you paint a very clear picture of what's happening in the UK and some of the drivers, the very important drivers that businesses are being pushed by to go in the right direction of greening and the transition. You also mentioned that it was extremely important to establish partnerships and collaboration. And so I just have a quick follow-up question on how NatWest is working with other ecosystem actors, in particular to overcome some of the challenges that you mentioned, both on the side of SMEs and of banks, for example, in regard to data, or in regard to SMEs in particularly challenging sectors, or where they're really constrained by their capacity and knowledge. So could you tell us how you're working with other actors in the ecosystem very briefly?
Absolutely. So I can give you a few examples. So obviously the Carbon Planner, which we created, that is very much going to be linked into all our partnerships, but I'll focus on a couple of partnerships that we're doing. So one of them is the Sustainable Homes and Building Coalition, which is NatWest launched with British Gas, Worcester Bosch and Shelter to improve UK building energy efficiency. And again, that's an example of the cross-industry, how we can learn, develop and offer scalable solutions. And then we look to then roll these things out so that we can provide them to all our clients. And another partnership that we've launched very recently is an energy pilot with Absola, Perth and Octopus. So this enables clients to diagnose their energy costs, their utilisation, make a plan, take action and see the results. So Perth is a digital platform. Customers can just connect their gas and electric meters to it. they'll generate an AI generated report that covers short, medium and long-term actions. Some of these will be behavioural and some of these will be investment asset-based actions. Absolar is slightly more detailed. So they use a light detection and ranging to view roofs and sites to detect sunlight and accurately estimate the volumes of savings and emissions. And the client then, if they want to, they can continue their journey with Absolar, accessing, which is what common feedback we get, accessing a marketplace with accredited solar installations. Absolar will negotiate on behalf of the business to get a better rate on your excess energy, and they'll also provide an installation management service. We've also partnered with Diode Energy. So, one of the biggest pain points for our customers is understanding how and when to transition to EV, as well as the cost of vehicles and the energy prices to fuel them. So through our partnership with Diode Energy, we're now able to help customers with the carbon planner action of switch to electric vehicles. Customers can use the EV readiness assessment tool to understand how EV ready their staff are, and then use the platform to future-proof their investment in EV and, of course, the very important charging infrastructure required to fuel them. And the last one I thought I would highlight is Carbon Place. So NatWest have joined forces with other financial institutions. Again, it goes back to that collaboration and all working together to create a global carbon credit transaction network. There's just a few of the things.
Thanks so much. I think that was, you made a very important point about some of the benefits of these partnerships in terms of developing scalable solutions. That seems to be something that's extremely key, and also seeking maybe to benefit from the low-hanging fruit, especially in regard to buildings and energy efficiency. So thank you very much for that. Now I'd like to turn to our next panelist, Gianluca Manca, who is Strategic Sustainability Officer at the European Banking Federation and who has a long experience in the area of sustainable finance. He's currently the chair of the ESG Reporting Task Force in EBF, and he also represents EBF at EFRAG, EFRAG's Project Task Force of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So Gianluca is going to be able to talk to us about a slightly different area. Gianluca, at the European Banking Federation, you've been looking at the direct and indirect implications of emerging reporting requirements on small businesses. Of course, banks are very concerned with ensuring that they can continue to provide finance to SMEs, even as these reporting requirements come into force. So I'd like to ask you, what do you see as the potential impacts of these new standards on SMEs in the European context?
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, ECD, for inviting me today. First and foremost, the EBF is the voice of the European banking sector with 33 national banking association members representing 3,500 banks. I would like to give a very brief history behind the curtains on how the EBF got involved with EFRAG and with the project we worked on that I will describe shortly, and how we actively participated to the drafting of the voluntary sustainability reporting standards for SMEs. To respond to the request of EFRAG, we started analyzing the impact that the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive would have on small companies, both listed and non-listed. The first thing we found out is a numeric evidence. We found out that small and medium listed companies account for a little bit more than 1,100 companies in Europe, representing 100,000 employees. On the other side, I think it was Celine that was mentioning it before. In Europe, there are 22 million registered entities, of which 93%, that was said by Bettina before, is represented by micro enterprises. And this numeric evidence immediately gave us the first glance talking to both sides of the fence, the large companies on the one side, asking them what they wanted from their suppliers, mainly smaller suppliers than how much than they were. And we asked also our bank members what they would have liked to ask to SMEs in the moment of financing them. So we tried to collect all this information together, and we found out one important thing, that sustainable procurement from large companies was already in place, which means that all the large companies that had to face the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the upcoming directive that is going to substitute the non-financial reporting directive, well, they started with a number of actions, I would say easy actions to put themselves a little bit closer to the moment when the directive is going to be basically applied. And sustainable procurement is one of the things that most of the large companies started to do, which means that their providers of goods and services, all of a sudden, they had to provide some kind of certification that they were better than their competitors in order to continue to provide those services on those products. And this thing is, of course, something that made us realize that not only listed SMEs needed to be tracked down and helped and figured how they had to face the new revolution of this high tide of regulatory pieces, but we needed to resolve the problem, of the numeric problem that I described before, the 22 million entities. In doing so, the first thing we did in order to be compliant with what the Commission might have wanted, we analyzed the impact assessment that was released on the 21st of April in 2021. This impact assessment by the Commission highlights really well that we need an economy that works for people, and that is the first word that the impact assessment used, enable SMEs to better contribute to and benefit from the transition to sustainable economy. That's another key word that we wanted to really analyze and try and put it into our works. Take an SME first approach. This is what it says also. Think small first. And think small first in this document is giving us the possibility to try it and propose a building block approach. So we start easy in the request for reporting, and then we can basically enlarge a little bit the scope depending on the complexity of the sector of the company itself. It's been said already before by the other panelists that there's no technical expertise, no resources in most of the SMEs. And then there was the evidence of what we call the trickle down effect. That is basically an effect that stems from what I just said before, that large companies all of a sudden will start requiring a number of information, a number of data that are difficult for small and medium enterprises to provide. So the trickle-down effect basically is that phenomenon through which the CSRD falls on the large companies, but inevitably touches all their value chain. So with all that in mind, we decided that we needed to propose something that was not necessarily and solely what the Commission was expecting at the time, because we basically opened a new Pandora saying that, yes, we could have stopped at listed SMEs, but we needed to take care of all those companies on the territory that basically represent 50% of our GDP. And I like to say these numbers because they numerically really frame the importance of what we're talking about today. So 50% of the European GDP, 65% of the workforce employed. That means over 100 million people employed by small and medium enterprises. So when we did that, we tried to analyze also the historic moment we were living through. So to offer a quick glance of the present global framework that we moved through, I would like to report the news that was published only the 9th of May. That it says that satellite data has revealed that methane leaks alone from Turkmenistan's two main fossil fuels fields caused more than global heating in 2022 than the entire carbon emission of the UK. Now, let alone 1 year of devastating war of Europe, the fact that we just come out from the COVID. These are all elements that had an enormous impact of the SME tissue all across Europe. So much that also President von der Leyen mentioned a few months ago the possibility to move through a just payment act, for instance, because we found out also in Europe that most of SMEs are not paid in time by the public administration or the larger clients that they have. So we need to think that this is a very fragile tissue of our economy, but the most important that we cannot step aside. So having said that, we realize that going back to the fact that 93% of these companies are micro companies, we need to understand that micro companies means mainly family businesses. We need to focus on the fact that these are not necessarily corporations, but these are citizens who try to create value for themselves and the society, but they operate in a fashion that is certainly much closer to the single entrepreneur rather than just the large corporation. So if we don't take that into account, we cannot move forward in trying to give them an answer. So that was basically the building block of our thinking when we started to propose the voluntary standards. And putting it very simple, we realized that we could not go ask shoemakers, restaurant franchisee, or plumbers to fix a problem that is constantly inflated by the catastrophic events that are mostly not accounted for when we refer to the Paris deal. So when I mentioned that Turkmenistan, we need to understand we cannot go to the single entrepreneur asking him to resolve the problems of the climate today when there are much larger issues at stake that needs to be resolved first. So we would like to give a little bit of breath to small and medium enterprises so that the banking sector, the first line of financing that they have, can interpret them in a way they can provide information and show how resilient or sustainable they can be in the patterns that they need to go through to respond to the Green Deal. And just to tell you what we tried to resolve, the first problem is the jargon. We found out that the jargon used in the SRS was even difficult for the insiders. So we tried to imagine, really, if we go to the restaurant franchisee and talk to him about double materiality, certainly he wouldn't have a chance to understand what we're talking about, because there is still a debate within the institutions in Europe that are deciding what it should be, and we are not clear on that on ourselves. So first things first, the jargon, a language that is simple, that can be understood. When we ask something to SMEs to let them participate to the transition, we need to give them the possibility to do so without undue cost. Because what we analyzed, and it was said also in the beginning, they have no structure to face compliance issues, legal issues, and audit issues. So these are just people, citizens. All of a sudden, they will need to respond to what the carbon footprint is. But they need to know what carbon is and footprint also, and the combined two words together, what it means for them in terms of the data they have to chase. Very often they have to go out in the market, ask a consultant, pay big money for that. So that is the first difficulty we try to assess. And as banks, we realize that the high tide I referred before gives us also a little bit of a conundrum to go through. Consider that the taxonomy regulation, the Article 8 that was released a few months ago, speaks clearly about the green asset ratio. That is basically a numeric evidence of how a bank is exposed to green. But in order to do that, first we have to consider that the green asset ratio is contemplated only for large companies. So small companies wouldn't be taken in consideration. But even if we move in the direction highlighted by the European Banking Authority with the banking book on taxonomy aligned ratio, that is basically a more elaborated version of the green asset ratio of the taxonomy, then we will move into a very fragile territory again, because in the denominator, the bank will need to put all the assets, including SMEs. But in the numerator, we have to put only the green activities, or the activities that are eligible first and align with the taxonomy. And to find out how a small micro enterprise is aligned with the taxonomy today is a challenge, both for the bank and also for the SME requiring a way of financing.
Thank you, Gianluca. I think you really reminded us of some important points. You referred to people. Of course, this is what it's about, and actually this is what our SME ministerial will be looking at, how to devise a people-centered approach to SME and entrepreneurship policy. And you also made it very clear that, you know, these requirements that will be coming into force are not just for large firms and not just impacting listed SMEs, but this trickle-down effect is going to have a very quick impact on smaller businesses. So my follow-up question to you, just in a minute, please, is what do you think needs to be done to enable SMEs to provide the data that will be asked of them? You mentioned the building block approach. How do you think ecosystem actors can cooperate to ensure that no SME is left behind in terms of access to finance once these requirements come into force?
Well, I can tell you what banks are doing now and what we need from other actors. Banks, what they're doing now, they're trying to collect data, And in collecting data, they're trying also to have one single standardized way to consider all the SME clients. This is not easy because banks cannot do it alone, and they need coordination. The coordination we're hoping for could possibly stem from EFRAG itself, but we know that there are a lot of delays to take in consideration SMEs because of a number of issues that we've encountered across this months. And we're trying to understand if this simple list of requirements that is applicable to all the companies, then in the building block approach, as I said before, can be expanded for different sectors. I'm making a quick example. If you consider a small company that trades diamonds, necessarily doesn't have a very important direct impact to dig into. But we know that on the value chain, on the mining side of that business, there are a lot of social issues. In that term, of course, we will need more information and a deeper cut through the data that we need. But for all the rest of the GDP maker of our territory in Europe, we need to give them a chance to do it with very simple jargon. That is the first line of defense for these guys that have suffered so much across a war and a pandemic.
Thank you, Gianluca. That's very clear. We need to ask them with very simple, very simple jargon. So thank you. Now I'd like to turn to our final panelist, Natalie Shumwell. Natalie is the Strategic Partnerships Manager for the SME Climate Hub with the We Mean Business Coalition. She works with stakeholders to accelerate a global movement, mobilizing and incentivizing SMEs to reduce their emissions and take climate action on net zero. And Natalie also brings experience working with multinational companies, helping them to develop and implement strategies in support of corporate, social, and environmental sustainability goals. So welcome, Natalie. Natalie, the SME Climate Hub works closely with small businesses individually. What have they told you about the challenges they're currently facing? And what are the main tools you provide to help SMEs and support them on the road to net zero? And can you please tell us also how you partner with other ecosystem actors? Please, you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Miriam. Thanks for having me today. Happy to speak with you. So in February, we released our the results of our annual survey. And so amongst our committed SMEs, the top reasons they cite for delaying any kind of climate action includes, some of the barriers that we've heard already today. And the top three were lack of skills and knowledge, lack of funding, and a lack of time. So those are really kind of the key barriers for at least those SMEs within our SME community. And so for those that might not be familiar with the SME Climate Hub, the SME Climate Hub was designed as kind of a one-stop shop platform for SMEs to help them on this net zero journey, help them make this green transition. As part of the platform, we have a public commitment that SMEs can make, and it gives them the opportunity to make it an internationally recognized climate commitment aligned with climate science. And also by making that commitment, they are entered in as part of the UN Race to Zero. So, as part of the one-stop shop platform, where we're trying to overcome some of these barriers that we've heard from our SME membership. And so we do this in a number of ways. We have a suite of totally free resources and education tools on our platform to help kind of educate and support SMEs in that journey. So we have an interactive training course called Climate Fit, which is a really great overview of climate action, providing some really foundational information about climate action for SMEs and what it means for their business. We have a simplified business carbon calculator, which we developed in collaboration with our partners Normative and Google.org, which enables SMEs to measure their carbon footprint and also identify their emissions hotspots within their operations for scope 1 and 2, and then optional on scope 3. And then we also just recently released a reporting tool. So a simplified reporting tool that was specifically designed for SMEs and enables them to easily report their annual greenhouse gas emissions, share kind of the actions that they've taken to reduce emissions throughout the year, and then also share the impact of their efforts and the impact of the actions that they've taken within the business. So we're really proud of those resources and the tools that we've developed, and making sure that those are still free and open access to all SMEs that need them. You mentioned the ecosystem, and I think the other panelists have touched on this today already, but SMEs make up a big part of our economy, and so we really need them in our net zero transition. But they can't do it alone. They can't kind of take this journey on their own. They need the support of the ecosystem. And they need governments and corporations and financial institutions and industry associations to support them on the journey. And so we at the SME Climate Hub are working in partnership with a diverse number of these ecosystem actors to reach SMEs with information, the information they need, and also to build out a set of support and an ecosystem of support and incentives to help them on this journey, but also incentivize them to take action towards net zero. And so we work with a lot of different actors in different ways. We work with large corporations, helping them engage and educate and reach SMEs within their supply chains, helping corporations find ways to not only educate, but also reward action, so reward progress towards net zero. We work with business and industry associations and networks to reach SMEs. Often these are kind of the front line of where an SME will go for information, the nodes of information that they will kind of access on a regular basis. So working with a network of industry associations and business associations to reach SMEs with the information they need. We're working with financial stakeholders. So with our commitment and with the new reporting tool that we've released, we're working with financial institutions to link these and integrate them into financing decisions. So providing preferential loan terms for SMEs that have made the commitment and are showing progress against the annual reporting that we're requiring. And then also working with government stakeholders. So ensuring that, the commitment and the reporting and the tools and resources that are available on the SME Climate Hub are promoted by government stakeholders. These are free resources that the SMEs can access. And again, linking the commitment and the reporting to government-sponsored incentive schemes and support schemes that they can access. I'll stop there, but that's just an overview of kind of all of the ways that we work with different stakeholders within the ecosystem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalie. I think that was, of course, you mentioned the role that incentives can play, and also the positive incentives, better financial conditions, better access to support. So that's something that's extremely important. I'd like to ask you a follow-up question. What do you see as the key conditions needed to enable SMEs to sort of face the different challenges that they have at the moment? So one being, bolstering their resilience while not compromising their progress on greening. And what can policymakers and regulators do to stimulate the demand side, since you work so closely with SMEs themselves? In your experience, what do you think is needed most today?
Yeah, so I think, for us at the SME Climate Hub, I think we frame, becoming more green, making that green transition, and taking climate action as businesses becoming more resilient. So that's part of, their pathway to resilience. For example, with improved energy efficiency, small businesses can kind of strengthen their resilience by reducing exposure to price volatility, and also kind of reach cost savings by taking those kinds of actions. So we really see them as two kind of interlinked things. But again, it's about the support they need. It's about removing those barriers that I mentioned. So the availability of tools and resources and technical assistance, as well as kind of access to finance, whether that's kind of low interest rate finance or concessional finance. So making it accessible to them. I think in terms of demand side, and again, we've heard this a little bit already from other panelists, but I think there are in my mind, two big things. One is about persuasive and clear messaging. So I think the climate space, can be confusing for any business, but particularly for small businesses. It's overwhelming. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of new regulation and compliance requirements coming. And so I think and there's also a lot of misinformation out there. So I think it's about being clear with the message that we're sharing, making sure that we're accessing the SMEs with the appropriate messages. I think making sure that we're, sharing and promoting free and low-cost tools and assistance for those SMEs. And I think what's really important, especially in kind of the current climate, is making sure that we as people within the ecosystem are making that business case for SMEs. This is obviously, climate action is important for all of us, but we need to show that taking climate action can lead to cost savings. It has a bottom line benefit to SMEs in addition to kind of that environmental benefit. And so again, showing that this kind of action leads to cost savings, but then also could also lead to financial or non-financial incentives. And again, about building out that ecosystem of incentives. So that would be my second thing, is making sure that those incentives are in place, right? So making sure that we're working together to make sure those incentives are in place, and helping them not only for, I think, SMEs that are providing green solutions. I think there's a lot of great incentives out there for businesses that are kind of creating or innovating new green solutions, but also for SMEs that are just looking to green their own operations. They're not necessarily in the energy space, they're not climate tech, but they're as Gianluca said, they're the shoemaker on the high street, that they are able to access incentives to green their own operations. And so again, it's about low cost technical assistance and support, and again, access to finance so that they can actually take those actions.
Thanks so much, Natalie. I see there was a question in the chat. Maybe I could just ask you while you still have the floor about the name of the SME reporting tool and if it's available to everybody.
Yeah, so the SME reporting tool it can be found on the SME Climate Hub, so smeclimatehub.org. It currently is available to SMEs that have made the commitment. It is, again, a free tool for SMEs, but it is currently only available to those that have made the commitment. We are considering bringing it kind of out from what we call our commitment wall and making it totally open access to everyone. But any SME that has made the climate commitment can access that reporting tool.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Sure.
So thanks to all of our panelists. Now we have a few minutes for any questions, comments, just for a couple of comments or questions. So if you would like to intervene, you can raise your hand on Zoom, or you can put a question into the chat. Is there anyone who would like to request additional information from our panelists?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Bettina. Sure.
No, I just wanted to mention a couple of points I reserved to until the end. So I'm not sure whether this is now the moment.
No, not yet. This is now
Okay.
just a Q&A. Then we'll be turning back to the panelists in just a moment for a final word.
Okay.
I see we have Maria who has a question or comment. Please, Maria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria. I'm from Policy Analyst at the OECD. I had one question for the representatives of the financial institutions. I was wondering where you are in terms of systematically integrating sustainability considerations in financing decisions, and basically, is there scope at the moment to provide essentially better financing conditions for SMEs that exhibit better financial performance, so across different types of investments? And also maybe related to that for Natalie, what's the, because you mentioned that you are, that's an initiative that you're also one of the initiatives. And so I was just wondering kind of what's the response rate from financial institutions in collaborating with you on this initiative. And for Gianluca, just simply, what are the types of data that this sort of simplified reporting that you are pursuing? Like, what are some types of data that you see as kind of easy for SMEs to obtain and to report on, and that financial institutions can use for their own reporting purposes? Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Well, you've covered everybody. So, I think we want to hear back from all of our panelists. Who would like to start?
I can make a start. So just to address the question, how we incorporate sustainability related aspects into our financing decisions. Speaking from the perspective of a promotional public financial institutions, what we did is we developed Paris-aligned sector guidelines, and these sector guidelines serve as an orientation for our customers to know the road to go to reach net zero by 2050. So we developed these sector guidelines, making sure that our portfolio, our promotional product portfolio, becomes carbon neutral after a couple of years as well. And how do we do this? So for each sector, we support with promotional loans and grants. We defined guidelines addressing the technologies and the promotional conditions, sharpening them over time, introducing new restrictions over time to make sure that there is considerable CO2 emissions. And we monitor the process with a CO2 footprint tool to make sure that we are on the right track. So this is basically the way how we integrate sustainability into our financing decisions.
Thank you, Bettina. Who would like? Gianluca, please.
Oh, there's Merit first to raise hand. So
No, it's fine. You go.
okay, thank you. Two things. First is a bit bitter consideration when we talk about the Paris deal. Apparently now the science-based facts show us that we're not gonna pivot around the 1.5 degrees anymore, but we need to shift a little bit. So this creates more uncertainty, of course. But if there's one thing I wanted to answer to Maria is that as an example, finance industry has been hit by different regulations, one of which is the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. And just to tell you that the most not important, but the most famous article of that regulation, Article 8, that basically gives a highlight of what should be inserted in a mutual fund, in an investment fund, that is basically compliant with some ESG practices within it. But it says also that companies included in a bucket should be should have somehow an aspect of governance dealt with. So they should be well-governed companies. And as you well imagine, legally, this thing is really vague. So what each bank, each asset manager is doing, they try to interpret what is well-governed for them. So some asset managers are saying that, for instance, a well-governed company has 20% of independent board members, and so on and so forth. So what companies can do now, what the financial system can do now to take these pieces of legislation that are out there, the potentially impacting new pieces of legislation, and try to find a very difficult way roaming between one and another because they don't converge yet. So one thing that is happening now that there's no clarity, and the clarity is going to be released, we truly believe, with simplicity. So to go back to your previous question, it's not a simplified wording we're looking for. We try to do that exercise within EFRAG, but if we strip out of the ESRS as it's been written now, and after the consultation, you know how many people came back saying this is too complex to understand and to put into force. Well, we're trying to dismantle completely that kind of language to offer a simple language. And when you say what should an SME report about, a simple example I would like to make is that if we go try and finance a small family business with 3 sons, for instance, we cannot ask that company for a diversity profile naturally, because it's being consistent with the reality of that particular SME. So the information should be of a much higher level to let everybody step in. If there's one thing I can really hope and foster, and I go back to what Natalie was saying about the tool, the low-cost tool, we hope for a zero-cost tool that is basically present on the site of the European Commission that lets everybody understand what is the so-called conversion between megawatts and the carbon footprint, because this is something that everybody needs to pay to have today. So One thing that we hope that it reaches the maturity soon is the ESAP, the European Single Access Point, that is basically the repository of all standardized information from all the companies in Europe, that is in a way that everybody understands on their Excel spreadsheet and they can apply for, so that this data become available to all the banking sector at once, and there is no more confusion between what's good and what's bad, because the amount of requests needs to be very small. To give you the last example, the amount of disclosure requirements we molded into the voluntary sustainability reporting standard for SMEs is 48 alone. And in this 48, there's also lines that are occupied by the address of the company, the name of the CEO, and so on and so forth. So very few information and very standardizable, so that everybody's on the same page.
Thank you, Mairead.
So I was just going to say, so I absolutely agree with everything that's just been said. I think as a bank, we are having regular climate discussions with our customers, and yes, it absolutely is now being factored in when we're making credit decisions. What are they doing? But as everybody said, we've got to take a realistic approach to that. What's their capability, and all of the things that we've all said before. So actually sometimes just making some behavioral changes and doing the little things that they can do is absolutely can be and should be recognized. And hence, like and I know there's the SME tool and our carbon plan tool, which is free as well, because it helps us enable to gather the information and the data, as well as helps the client, and then it can give them some tangible actions that can be at no cost, or there can be some cost, but then built in is much cheaper funding and finance. And I think that's really important. And I know, if you're investing, so I know we've made some big changes on when you're investing and the kind of funds that you're investing in, to ensure that you're supporting ESG businesses. I think, it's just being about much more transparent. I totally agree about the language, keeping it really as simple and as transparent, and having the conversation, because everything will keep evolving. So at the moment, we're still more encouraging our customers to go on this journey. At some point, there will be regulatory and there will be clear benefits. Our risk appetite will be broader and wider for those businesses that are making transition steps on that journey. That's definitely coming. We already recognise it from an interest rate perspective, but actually from a we'll lend more if you are doing more, or you're more ambitious in what you trying to achieve, because there's got to be that support, and you want grants to be available, and so it's really just trying to, and hence, I think that system thinking approach, it helps me if you think about systems rather than, because almost every business potentially is going to become an energy generator at some point, and businesses are all quite heavily reliant on mobility, so it's again looking at it across that whole piece. And I think the supply chain thing is absolutely critical. So whatever tool you're using, but one of the benefits we've seen is often our big corporates are liking the carbon planner because they're basically giving it to all their supply chain. So even if it's not all bells and whistles at the moment, but they're getting a standardized approach across their whole supply chain, which helps them in their reporting. So I think all of those kind of things are really important.
Thank you. And Natalie?
Sure. I mean, in terms of the response rate from financial institutions, I mean, we've had a lot of interest in the hub broadly in terms of the education and the tools and the resources. And then also with the launch of the reporting tool, there's been a lot of interest in kind of sharing what that looks like with financial institutions, and them kind of taking a look at that data. Obviously, I think the big gap in this space is the data and what we can learn when we can gather that data. And so we're kind of continuing to work with financial institutions on what we're seeing. And again, starting to explore how can we link some of these actions or this reporting that SMEs are doing through the Climate Hub to those preferential kind of financing terms. So yeah, certainly kind of has been interest, and we're working on kind of putting that into action right now.
Thank you. Thanks so much to all of you. So we're nearing the end. I'm going to give the last word to our panelists. But before I do that, I'd like to just recall that, of course, today we were here to try and hear from you the key priorities, the key challenges, the messages that you would like to send to ministers who will meet next month in Paris on the issue of SME and entrepreneurship and building resilience and the transitions. So I think that we received a lot of valuable input from our panelists. We heard a lot, of course, about the challenges and the barriers that SMEs face. Of course, a high degree of fragmentation in the SME sector, high complexity with limited capacity for SMEs to navigate that complexity. There's a lack of information, sometimes trust, sometimes a lack of finance. We heard from Natalie that the top reasons for SMEs delaying action on sustainability was a lack of skills and knowledge, lack of funding, and lack of time. We also heard about some of the important drivers for SMEs to take action relating to purpose, opportunities, cost saving, and of course, compliance. There we understand that SMEs are being impacted already by some of the changes and requirements coming into force for larger enterprises, especially through their supply chains, through the opportunities they have to bid for markets. And so this is not something that's a hypothetical question about is it going to impact them? It's about how it's impacting them and when it's impacting them. There's a strong trickle-down effect, as we heard. We, of course, heard that this is not just a question about anonymous corporations. This is about people. This is about SMEs that engage with their whole family in their businesses, that serve their local communities. So all of these are very important inputs that we can bring. We also heard about the action that the financial sector is taking by providing dedicated products to incentivize greening on behalf of SMEs, by working together with the actors in the ecosystem, the many different actors to facilitate SMEs compliance with some of these requirements. So I think we have a lot of valuable messages there, but I'd like to actually give the last word to each of our panelists in just 1 minute. Think about if you have the ministers in front of you right now. First, I'd like to start with Bettina. In concrete terms, can you tell us what you think needs to be done to enable SMEs to accelerate their green transition?
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to point out the work of the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group, where we investigated into the drivers of success for energy efficiency investments. And I think it can be transposed also to sustainable investments. And we saw that the key drivers affecting the demand for corporate energy efficiency investments differ very much between large and mid-cap and small SMEs. And the main drivers for SMEs to take action on sustainable investments is a clear business case and baseline, the awareness at key decision maker level and leadership, and the human capacity, as we already mentioned, the existence of public subsidies, key decision makers' confidence in the resources, the corporate debt capacity, and the existence of public support. So having said that, it's not the lack of not the lack of funds or not the lack of money, it's a lack of project pipeline. And what do SMEs need to build up this and stimulate this project pipeline? I think it's a combination of a suitable financial offer that suits the needs of the SME sector, the availability of bank finance plus promotional financial products designed to meet the needs of smaller companies. It needs to be transparent, easy to access, in the ideal case, combined with risk sharing with financial institutions. This in combination with support, enabling infrastructure composed of information in education and advisory, strengthening of the networks, all this in order to help better understanding and raise awareness for the opportunities, for the business opportunities. Second, make use of the dynamic of sustainable finance activities in the private financial institutions. So banks, as we learned, are an important touch point and interlocutor for the SMEs. Small corporates depend and rely often on banks to finance their investments. So in particular, the private financial actors increasingly engage with their clients to raise awareness for sustainability, driven inter alia by regulatory developments and shareholder and market expectations. So we see, for instance, the small savings and cooperative banks incorporating the subject of sustainability into their customer dialogue. This helps a lot. However, there is still a way to go. So we think that strengthen the capacity and making use of existing networks and providing funds for these networks could also be a very important step. We think that developing a regional support structure, incorporating the chambers of commerce, for instance, build up and finance and advisory services available for SMEs, and establish regional one-stop shops could be of help. In Germany, we work with the energy efficiency networks, which are now expanded to energy efficiency and climate networks, a well-proven way to address a number of non-financial barriers, learning from each other, and involving the SMEs directly into discussing suitable ways to tackle the challenges associated with the transition. So strengthen the advisory capacity using the existing structure, and in the ideal case, provide coordination capacities for investment measures. So this is what I can contribute at this for this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's a tall agenda for everybody to work together on. Mairead, what in your view is the most urgent action for governments to take to enable SMEs to accelerate and finance their green transition?
So I take it I'm sort of representing sort of the SMEs that we bank. What we hear commonplace is green skills. So we got an example where one of our businesses had to set up their own training hub so they can reskill gas engineers so they can now fit heat air pumps. We've got another one who's designed this infrared wallpaper ceiling that's amazing, but then we're going to need, quadruple the number of decorators in order to retrofit housing. So that investment in reskilling and upskilling our workforce, I think, is really key. And then the other thing, I think, well, maybe this is very UK focused, but we need to make decisions on like hydrogen, and so that our businesses can then know that they can invest and build in the infrastructure rather than not knowing, and therefore it sort of just creates that uncertainty. So we just need to be much more decisive, and it will evolve and change, but make decisions to start to move in that space. Indecision is not what SMEs want.
Right, thank you so much. Natalie, what do you see as the most urgent action for governments?
Sure. I think, as mentioned, I think providing government programs where SMEs can access free or low-cost advisory services. I think we have, again, a number of tools and resources, but often SMEs need that one-on-one support. And so any kind of program where they can access that support, I think, is extremely useful. And I think one other point in line with kind of what Gianluca has been saying and the research that his group has been doing is, I think the important thing that governments can do is bring stakeholders together to kind of align around what we're asking of SMEs in terms of data and reporting. I think, you know, in kind of my thinking, you know, taking the action is the priority, right? We want SMEs taking action. So we don't want to overburden them by having them have to report in 10 different ways to 10 different stakeholders. So as much as possible, bringing those stakeholders together to align on what we're asking, align and streamline what we're asking of SMEs in terms of reporting and compliance.
Thank you. That's very useful. And I would give the last word to Gianluca. What is your key priority for governments to ensure that SMEs can help drive the green transition?
I cannot but echo Natalie now, because I mean, she says something I'm totally in line with. But I will say it in a much less elegant way, I would say. I come from a country where when we pay taxes, we need to pay a consultant to do that. Otherwise, it's impossible. Okay. I would like, and we would like as banks, to avoid the step for small and medium enterprises. We desperately need them to join the transition. So please don't make them pay for this. One simple, very easy, low-cost solution to go in that direction is just to ask at a European level all the utilities to provide the conversion for the carbon footprint of these people, so that when an SME receives a bill, in the bill it's already written how much is their carbon footprint. This would resolve at least the emphasis on the E of the ESG acronym, at least a very, very little beginning of how to entrap them in a framework that banks do understand. That is the first thing. And the other, since directives have proven to be difficult to basically bring on the goal in the short time because of the consultation that we've seen, it takes time for them to be mature, then I would say to the legislators, please keep your arms open to guidelines eventually issued by the main stakeholders in the market, and guidelines that can be immediately circulating and immediately molding into a territory that now needs to be covered by SMEs in the front line of the green transition.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I'd like to thank all our panelists again, and thanks Celine also for being with us, and all the participants who stuck with us. We're just a few minutes over time. So I think we're left with some very powerful messages, and I'd like to just say that you all can count on us to make sure that those messages are brought forward by the platform in their statements and in the discussions with ministers on the 26th of June at the high-level stakeholder event. Once the statement that we're preparing is finalized, we can of course share it with you all, and you can in turn can share it as well. And I hope it will be a powerful voice to bring even more visibility to the issues that you so eloquently raised and highlighted today. So thank you again, and I wish you all a very good rest of the afternoon, and a good evening to those also already in night in Asia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.